All right, good afternoon to everyone here in Latvia. Good morning in Thailand. Good morning in Mexico. Good evening in Thailand. Sorry about that. And welcome to everybody to our webinar. This is our third in our series of managing through this crisis. Thank you for coming from Riga Business School and the Adizes Institute. Tonight, we want to shift gears a little bit and start to look into the future, see how markets are changing and what to expect coming out of this crisis, and what should companies start to do today to prepare for that. So today we've got three speakers. They'll give us some ideas about what's coming next, how to get ready for it. As always, you can submit questions. You send them through the chat. You can address your questions to the panel in general, or you can always direct them to one of the specific speakers. Okay. So we've got an exciting panel today. I expect you will be able to take away at least one good idea from here and use it to help move your companies forward. So let's talk about who we've got. First, we've got Olafs Rītinis, who you can see he's got a jungle behind him. He's Australian Latvian and has spent more than 30 years starting and building various businesses which operate throughout Asia, Australia. He also works tirelessly promoting Latvia in the region, and today he's joining us from his home in Bangkok. We also have Toms Dietrichsons, who is a Riga Business School alumnus. He is with Orkla Latvia, and before that Spilva, where he started in sales and marketing, moved into logistics, then moved on to Chief Financial Officer, and now he is CEO of Orkla Latvia, on the board of Orkla Lithuania, as well as has various other roles that he fulfills. And he joins us from somewhere in Riga. And finally, last but not least, we have Sunil Dovidi. Sunil has for nearly 40 years worked around the world in executive management positions. Since 2000, he has been with the Adizes Institute, where he is a principal associate. He served as president, he served as professional director, and today he works with companies around the world, helping to transform them into organizations built on continuous innovation, continuous improvement, and highly collaborative management structures. And Sunil joins us from Monterrey, Mexico. Thanks everyone for joining us today. So I want to start with you, Olafs. You have extensive experience. Am I on mute? Okay. You have extensive experience in the Asian region and have been there in Bangkok and in Singapore throughout this crisis. We're starting to hear that the markets are opening up slowly there. And so maybe you can tell us what you're actually seeing on the ground there.
Sure. Well, firstly, good evening and greetings from Thailand. I won't attempt to shake anybody's hands because that's not allowed these days anymore. But the Thai typical greeting, the Y, works very well. As Greg mentioned, I'm sitting in Thailand, which is my home base. My business base is and has been for many years Singapore. So tonight I'm sitting in the tropical jungle as opposed to the concrete jungle of Singapore. Just a little bit on myself and the situation here, and then I'll answer your question directly, Greg, if that's okay. Basically, in Thailand, the situation is that we have a state of emergency and the lockdown. Here we have that combined with a military-enforced nighttime curfew, which means that between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. I'm not allowed to be on the street. That's not normally a problem for me anyway, but it's a pretty strict nighttime military curfew. Of course, we have no commercial flights in or out of the country. We have all the usual social distancing measures in place, and everything is pretty much closed except food outlets and vital services. So in Thailand, as in most other countries, we are in very interesting times, which reminds me of the old Chinese saying, which is, may you live in interesting times. Now, and these are the interesting times, and that can be a blessing or a curse, depending on how you choose to look at it. Let's look at it in a positive way. So Obviously the lockdown for lots of people has meant no travel for a number of months. It's aside from getting over travel withdrawal symptoms, it's actually been some good time out to have a sort of rethink about the need to even travel and how necessary is it to have face-to-face meetings. Here we are, probably 100 or more of us communicating together very happily using Zoom. I'm using Zoom video calls and Skype and WhatsApp very effectively every day of the week, doing things like having a client company in London, communicating with our investors in Singapore and Japan. And the whole thing actually, I have to say, works really well. And I guess there are millions of people doing business remotely and doing similar things at the moment. When it comes to things in Southeast Asia generally, there's a concept here or a principle here, which is that life goes on. Because a lot of these countries, for those who have visited places like Bangkok, these cities are 24/7. They never stop. So consequently, life does go on and business also goes on. People are always finding new creative ways to work in the current climate and to do things and to basically stay in business. Of course, a lot of smaller business people are also suffering. That's the other side of the coin. It's definitely not a very rosy picture for many people in business. But there are smart, innovative businesses that are finding ways to continue to do things. My company is in the investment world. Ventures International Group is a Singapore-based capital raising firm. And we basically have clients for whom we're raising private equity capital. And we have an investor network across Singapore and Southeast Asia. What we're seeing from investors here, and this is more directly answering your question, Greg, is that private investors and funds are still very much open for business. And why is that the case? Simply because they are sitting on money. There's a lot of dry capital out there, a lot of dry powder that still needs to be deployed, still needs to be utilized. There's an amazing amount of capital in the markets still, which is on pause for the moment, is on hold in terms of it being deployed, but it's there. And the people who are running these funds and investors generally realize that they need to be continuing to look at investment opportunities now, even during this current period, simply so that when things do come back to normal, and of course it won't be the same old normal, it'll be a new normal, whatever that means, but they're basically positioning themselves for when things do come back to normal, so that they have already identified good companies and good businesses to invest in, and they can start writing checks when things do start to get back to normal. So, but what it's causing them to do is to rethink the way they're doing business. So in many cases, their appetite for investment might be to look at smaller investment amounts. There will be a flight to quality, so they'll be looking more for quality businesses to invest in, so companies that have a proven business model, companies that are already profitable or close to profitable, companies that have a strong position in the markets that they're in, but also are likely to have a strong position in the new world. And that includes companies in sectors like all the obvious ones. I mean, I think we can guess which ones they are. Fintech is by far and away probably the biggest one. I'll come back to that one in a moment. There's also insurtech, which is related to that. In other words, the ability to not just do financial transactions and all of one's banking and take care of all of one's financial needs digitally, but also same with insurance needs. A big one, obviously, is going to be telemedicine. I actually heard of a doctor in Riga who is currently consulting patients already using a telemedicine approach, using Zoom or Skype, and is doing that quite successfully. But if you think about being able to do that on a larger scale, where you don't need to go and sit in the doctor's waiting room together with all the other sick patients, you could be sitting at home in the comfort of your own home, speaking to the doctor, advising him of what ailments you have and receiving his advice on what needs to be done, and even taking that a step further to the point where the doctor could conceivably then issue a prescription electronically, which goes straight to the pharmacy, which arranges for payment with you and delivery to your home. So there are all, kinds of sectors like this that lend themselves to, being done from a distance. Distance learning, obviously, for educational institutions like RBS is also a big one. I was just thinking earlier, I love to be in Riga, and I love to do my once a year or so guest lecture at RBS. As much as I like to do that, maybe I don't have to be in Riga to do that anymore. So distance learning is certainly one. When it comes to fintech, I think every country has its innovative fintech businesses, and Latvia certainly has a number of them. And fintech certainly has a big place in the new world. Fintech was already a booming industry sector even before all of this happened, but I think even more so now, where people will expect that they can take care of all of their financial payments and funds transfers and all of their financial management remotely and digitally. So what's important there is to recognize that a lot of the companies that are in the fintech sector, some of them are still relatively early stage companies. They're still emerging businesses. So even though they have good solutions to offer in their own domestic marketplace or even globally, they need support. And to that end, governments that recognize the importance of this are actually starting to provide financial support for them. So, for example, the government in Singapore, which has long realized the importance of its fintech sector and fintech companies in that marketplace and globally coming out of Singapore, have just announced, in addition to all of the other funding that they've been doing, the stimulus packages and the social welfare packages and the stimulus for business and so forth, they've just announced a $150 million fund for fintech businesses specifically. So that's to help fintech businesses to educate their people, to build infrastructure, to build their products and services, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess the point that I'm leading to here is that this is not the time to be waiting and sitting here in a state of thinking about, well, this is all doom and gloom. This is not a time to be sitting on our hands. This is a time for companies and countries and economies to be looking to what needs to be done and what can be done for the new world, and starting to move creatively and decisively now to where they think the new world will require them to be. It reminds me a little bit of the famous saying by the famous ice hockey player Wayne Gretzky, who apparently said something along the lines of, let's not skate to where the puck used to be or to where the puck is now, let's skate to where it's going to be. So the challenge for all of us is to figure out where the puck is going to be and what the new world will require. But it's certainly possible to identify certain sectors now and technologies and solutions and services that will have a strong place in the new world. I'll pause for a breath there, Greg.
Called him the great one. And so I think that advice is going out to help build some great companies. So you're sitting in Singapore, in Thailand. You've got a lot of experience in that side of the world, but we're sitting here in Latvia. I know that you do a lot to try to help Latvian companies. What kind of advice would you give to a Latvian management team about how they need to prepare for post-crisis world?
Well, I think
taking into account, one second, taking into account that you are there and you can actually help them.
Sure. Well, we can advise and assist. There's also in Singapore, for example, there's good representation from the Latvian Investment and Development Agency, LIA, is there, and it's probably more their role to assist Latvian companies coming into the region. But one of the things that I always say to Latvian companies is, it's not necessarily always the best move to try to break into the larger markets like China or India. Of course, they're the world's largest markets and they have the largest potential and so forth, and everybody is excited about the potential of doing business in China or India. But let's not forget the ASEAN region, which is the 10 Southeast Asian countries, which together combined have a population of 640 million people, which is more than the entire population of the 27 member states of Europe. And ASEAN will be the fourth largest economic grouping in the world, or the fourth largest economy by 2030. So there is a lot of potential in these markets. There are growing middle classes in these countries with consumer dollars to spend. But obviously, one has to look very carefully at the relevance in the new world of whatever product, solution, or service the company has. And that's a difficult call to make. Some are going to be obviously relevant. Some will be less obviously relevant. But I mentioned some sectors that are absolutely going to be relevant. But the rest of it is, we don't have all the answers at this stage.
Okay. All right. Good. So thanks. I'm going to move on to Tom's now. And Tom's, you're running, an important food company here, what we would call an essential business. You're keeping Latvians fed to a large extent. Perhaps you can briefly tell us what the situation is in your company, but more importantly, focus on what steps are you taking to prepare for a post-crisis world?
All right. I guess first of all, thank you, Greg, for having me here. It's nice to sort of return back to RBS after more than 10 years, I guess. Nice to meet you as well. If you allow me, I think I would a little bit sort of start with the reflection on or take a few steps back in terms of just briefly telling our audience what Orkla is. It's maybe the brands that we operate here in Latvia are very, very well known for, I would assume, most of the people, but Orkla is a relatively new animal in Latvia as such. And for those who are not that familiar, just to say that Orkla Group in total is leading FMCG, fast-moving consumer goods company in the Nordics and the Baltics, operating with roughly 18,000 employees, mostly in Europe, but we do have operations in India and some in Asia as well, represented in total roughly in 40 countries, plus minus. We are all about brands, all about number one, number two brands in the regions that we operate. As a result, sort of the total you would find in the portfolio of more than 400 different brands, which are produced in more than 100 factories, mostly across Europe as well. And Orkla is a listed company, so it's listed on the Oslo Stock Exchange. So if anyone sort of decides to become a shareholder, that's just a few clicks away and off you go. When you speak about Orkla Latvia, yes, we are one of the largest FMCG companies in the Baltics, and obviously our jewels are sort of the well-known food brands that we sort of nourish and develop, such as Laima, Selga, Stabura, the Adažu, Chipsi, Spilva, and many sort of more to follow on those. In total, we operate in line of 120 million euros per annum, with 5 factories, which is quite important as well, that we have quite a big factory foothold in Latvia. So today, having 5 factories, and as probably some of you have noticed, we have commissioned one more now, a new chocolate factory, new home for Laima in Adažu, and actually are about to start a project of another factory for the biscuits. So all in all, we do have more than 1,200 employees in the company here in Latvia, both back offices, frontline, but very, very large amount of them being obviously in the factories as well. That being, I guess that's sort of a little bit of background on who we are. When it comes to the current situation and crisis situation that we have not only in Latvia but in the world as such. I think I usually sort of have the saying, I've been in food industry for now more than 15 years, and there are good times when economies are booming and industries and fintechs doing what double-digit or triple-digit growth annum and on annum. And usually when you come into the foods, you are happy if you have if you've managed to get to the double digits for the large organization, that's already sort of a thumbs up. But when we hit the recessions as well, we don't fall that deep either. So what I like to say is, whether it's a peacetime or wartime, people need food, and that's as you mentioned, as Greg as well. That's is essential role that we are currently playing as well. It's not only sort of business as usual as we do, but we have a social responsibility which kicked in with the crisis and with the coronavirus as well, actually making sure that we provide our consumers and customers with the food items that are sort of essential. I think reflecting on as well on the status, so obviously, since we are quite large organization, what I'm happy about is that we managed to I think switch into the crisis mode, if you say, quite early in the situation. This is a little bit sort of upside being part of a relatively larger group. You have those insights coming in from different markets as well. So you can learn. I think for me personally, Denmark was one of the markets which I was personally looking quite closely and seeing what things are happening there, and they were sort of resembling in the Baltics with a few days delay initially. And I think, we kicked the crisis mode quite early in the March. I think in first dates of the March, I already had the first meetings canceled, business trips canceled, and having this Teams or Skype meetings. Actually on the 12th of March, when in Latvia the government announced the state of emergency, we were already sort of very far into the process where we were sort of working already from home, and you could say on the next day, more than 200 people from our company were actually working from home, and they still do as of today. So we are into week 7 from working from home, which obviously have its own challenges. That was sort of one part, but on the contrary, obviously we have 5 factories, which whether you like it or not, people need to be there in order to provide the essential foods and to continue with the production. And that was another big sort of part which we kicked off very early and started to implement, a lot of safety measures and to do at most to protect our employees and to protect our factories, making sure that they continue to run. And I'm super happy. I know might be that some of those people actually are in our audience as well, and they know that I'm humbled and super grateful for the work that has been done, because we have managed to sort of, as of today, still continue to run on more than 100% capacity, I could say, as a result, sort of delivering everything that was demanded and expected, even in the panic buying when all the shops were empty. We managed to shift goods to our clients and afterwards in consumers. So a lot of measurements in crisis preparation. We can maybe later reflect on that one if we have time as well. So specific actions that we were taking. So that's the situation as of today. So basically, we are we will obviously survive. We are not in the industry which sort of will disappear, obviously. Yet there are, since we are quite large organization, there are parts which currently are suffering more. We have a Lima Chocolate Museum that's closed. We have 20, give or take 20 Lima stores, so you can actually go into Lima shop, buy some sweets. very many of those were sort of related to tourism. That's gone. Obviously, it affects as well. But when it comes to our core business, producing food, confectionery, snacks, that's still there. And obviously, the demand is there as well. Some categories more, some less, but we are in there. Coming to sort of where we are heading, or what's the new normal, so to say, after once we get out of this, no one knows, obviously. But one thing that we are doing on our end, together with the management and people in the organization, is to do, we are doing scenarios. And I think that's one of the take I would definitely sort of suggest anyone, whether you are hit or not, or large or small, to do those things. I think, saying having no plan is a good plan for failure sort of fits very nicely in these circumstances. So this is actually what we are doing, and obviously it's it's a tough exercise to do. But few things that we see going forward is that there is a huge shift, or definitely there will be a shift in the consumer behaviors. Olaf just mentioned as well, maybe he doesn't need to come to Riga to give his lectures in person, rather to do them online. But you know what, he just mentioned before this webinar to me as well, that every time he comes to Riga, he buys quite a bit of snack, lima chocolate, and brings back to his family and friends. And that obviously is a question mark now. What's happening in future with that one? Obviously, today it's not there. It will recover, but what will be the future in terms of a travel trade, for example, is a big question mark. You see, we are, big part of our business is in the chocolate, and chocolate is always an impulse product. So very seldomly when we go into the stores, very seldomly we have on our shopping lists that we want to buy chocolate. Rather, this is an impulse. We are, as a company, we do a lot of tips and tricks sort of to make that impulse. Once you go into the store, you see a nice lima stand or nice blinking, some advertising pointing to chocolate, and we create that impulse, and you just, oh right, I will take that chocolate and bring it back home. And you know what, I actually might have 2 or 3 of those, and let's grab a pack of snacks as well. Now, today, what we know is that you have, like, the main retailers have disclosed that up to 30% the drop in traffic. So 30% of people are not there in the store, so you don't have that impulse for the 30%. Now, coming back to those 70% who are still doing the shopping today, guess what? Their shopping lists have become like 3, 4, 5 times bigger than they used to be, because they are doing it once a week or once in 2 weeks. And another thing is, before they enter the store, they just, breathe in, they do their shopping, and they just get out as quickly as possible. So try to get that impulse in the store. It's not that easy anymore. So how do we actually get to the consumer? How do we create that that impulse? Will be a big sort of question for not only us, but for many in the food industry. Another part where we are sort of quite represented as well is in obviously sort of condiments and food, ketchups, tomato sauces, dressings, and so on. Well, obviously, since people are, all the out of home currently, restaurants and so on, it's, for the time being, you could say, gone. It will recover. But to what extent? One thing for sure, people are getting back to roots, if you could say so, and cooking much more at home. So that is another sort of opportunity which needs to be looked on. Can we provide a sort of meal solutions? Can we be in their minds when they do the decision for what they're going to cook tonight, what food they will bring on the table? So this is what we are working as well in planning scenarios. I would say if we used to have quite clear how everyone is what eating occasions and habits a person on the normal regular day has, starting when he or she wakes up, having a breakfast, having snack, having lunch, dinner, and so on. So we need to now redo those exercises and see how it will actually come out once we go out of the, or once we get into the new normal. And other part, which is the last one, which I want to maybe outline is obviously there will be a huge changes as well, the way how we operate. Olaf's already mentioned the very many of those, and I will not repeat, but I think I like very much one of our VPs in Orkla just said it took, we were planning to have, the digital transformation for 5 years now, and like a big chunk of it happened over the last 5 weeks. So I guess with that, I will give back to you, Greg.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that. And you're not the first one to talk about changes that companies and people in companies have been resistant to for a number of years, all of a sudden bearing fruit in the last few weeks. Right? Now people are really ready to change. It's much easier to push things through the company now than it has been. I'm going to take exception with one thing that you said, that chocolate is an impulse product, at least not in my house. With my 3 kids, it is one of the essential foods. So you've done a good job there. All right. So Sunil, I want to move to you now. You're working closely with multiple management teams and CEOs and likely around the world. What advice are you giving them on on what they should be doing right now to get ready for the post-crisis world? So go ahead.
So I think let's stay with the chocolate thing. So our kids have left the home, and it is a strategic buy. So right now our groceries run through this pick and go option. So we go online, and the first thing we have to make sure is the chocolates are stocked up. So
Tones will ship you some Lima chocolate for sure.
There you go. And as my wife was saying, our buttons on our pants and jeans are social distancing themselves. So, no, but good. Thanks for the opportunity, Greg. And I think it's a great setup, because as you went from, so Olaf was talking about, okay, there's future opportunity, and there's definitely opportunity out there. There's no doubt about it. And then the trick is now, but if you're in the middle of the storm, how do you find this opportunity? Because if you're in the swamp and there's alligators coming after you in terms of cash flows, and got to maintain payroll and keep up the hope and keep up the morale. How do you even keep up morale? And I think the first step is to just look at what is a crisis. A crisis really is change coming in at a very fast pace. So really it's not something so obtuse, it's just change on steroids. So things are happening very quickly, and what you normally, but we've been dealing with change for a long, long time. So the same principles of dealing with change still apply. The only difference is the time dimension shrinks. You don't have that much time to fool around and think, oh, I'm going to have my 3-year strategic plan. Sorry, guys, we have 90 days to figure this stuff out. So the good news is that there's an opportunity now, and the environment is providing us a gift to basically do things that, we actually, quite frankly, we should have been doing all along. And a crisis is just a manifestation of stuff that didn't get taken care of in the past. And a simple example is, you got a truck and the business is good, and you keep running the truck, but you don't take it in for maintenance, and the stuff just falls apart. So this is a time where there is a falling apart that's going to take place. It is, happening in spades, but it's a time to reintegrate, because with change, the nature of change is it causes disintegration. And that's the common denominator. So when change happens, stuff falls apart. And the simple answer is, what's the antidote? And you've got to go integrate. And let's talk about integrate what, because many times people talk about integrate mean, I'm not sure what that means. It's a nice word. But integrate is to make sure that your culture, who you are, remains. Because at the end of the day, what you do, how you do it, and what markets you're serving is all going to change. But how you adapt and how you how you move into the next, as Olaf was saying, the new world order is going to be key. So two characteristics that we see happening with changes and crisis, and fast changes, the need to make decisions fast. There's a speeding up. But very often what happens is that the speeding up is happening, but the decisions sometimes are causing worse problems. You make a decision, but you get into bigger trouble. So the word I'd like to introduce, and that's what we use with most of our clients, is the word correct thinking. How do you get correct thinking into the system? Because how do you choose wisely? And before you can do that correct thinking, you've got to slow down to speed up. And because there's always this phenomenon, oh, what's going to happen? And there's anxiety, am I missing out? Or the other part is there's a freezing up. Sometimes people just freeze up and say, maybe it'll go back to normal. Maybe things won't be as bad. So one is you have to move fast, and some people are moving fast, but they're doing it with whatever tools they might have. And the other time is people freeze up and don't move fast enough. And maybe this thing, let's wait a couple of weeks, maybe the economy will open up. And so those two phenomena are there. And to break that, you really have to go inwards and break that pattern of either too much anxiety or freezing up. So the first step really is not to do anything outside, but to slow down the anxiety or panic, as well as the freezing up. Because many times people are looking for what's the answer, what's the solution. This is typically a first-time event. Never in the history of at least our generation or the three generations that might be existing today has there been a complete shutdown of the whole system in terms of, we look at the oil thing right now. Oil in West Texas Intermediate is running at negative. So people are producing oil and are paying you to take the oil away. So that's a real phenomenon. And the people but in this mess, there's an opportunity. So if you have storage tanks, you can make a lot of money. So how do you pivot and how do you do things to take advantage of, for example, that particular situation? So I'll talk briefly about slowing down first. And many times people talk about, because when you're in a crisis, you're speeding up. But the first step is to just, do some micro practices and just relax the system. Because if you don't relax the system, you most likely will not get to the essence. And here's where intuition has to kick in. And what we talk about and we see happening in many organizations is moving from thinking to feeling, because thinking happens from here. It's the brain stuff, and let's do this and let's do that. But feeling happens from the heart. So how do you activate the heart? And it's an interesting phenomenon, just something to think about. I wonder why the coronavirus is being somewhat discriminatory, where it actually is not touching as many women and is not touching as many youth. The young and the women are not as badly affected as the men. So just something to ponder about. But I believe there's a shift happening. There's definitely global shifts happening, geopolitical shifts. And where I'm sitting in Mexico, I'm sitting between two very interesting presidents. There's Donald Trump on the other side of the border. And then in Mexico, there's another president called Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, and both these guys are creating policies which make absolutely no sense. But in that noise, there's a lot of opportunity. So I'm actually in this unique place, in a place called Monterrey, which I'm now affectionately calling Middle Earth. So we take South US and Northern Mexico, which is very productive. And there's global shifts that are going to take place. So for example, China is being beat up, and I'm seeing so many requests. I need to move my production out of China, and I'm coming down to this place called Middle Earth. So Middle Earth has got opportunities galore, for example. So, but in order to take advantage of this, we have to understand, because we can't just jump in to a new thing. There's opportunity, but that could be the worst thing. So so just piggybacking of what Tom said, because scenario planning is absolutely key, but very often we also have the psychological issue of you actually manifest what you think. So how do you do the worst case scenario planning, but not trigger the worst case, because you can actually manifest the darn thing. So then again, that part is, how to be detached from the thing, but then move, and you got to feel with the heart. So how do you activate the heart more in this system? Because we're all used to, when you go to business school, we're given all this logic, think fast, and those are all valid, but we've got to engage the brain and the heart. So that's really what's happening. The intuition comes in. But from a strategic standpoint, really people have five real choices at this point in time. And I think Tom's already gave us a hint as to what those could be. And one is, you have basically, you've got to go into the 007 category. This is the 007, license to kill, You can kill certain things because you've been hanging on to something for a long time. And this doesn't necessarily mean just your products and services. It actually means even cleaning up some of your thinking in your head. Because very often, you have certain beliefs and assumptions that you make which drive the business. And once you remove those beliefs, you can actually see some freedom. So that's one thing, is actually chopping things off and not because they don't serve the new world anymore. So there's no point keeping them on artificial life support. The second thing that happens is this concept of hibernation, because and that's a very normal tendency. Bears go into hibernation, and hibernation is a beautiful thing because as disintegration is happening, this is the time you can reintegrate. It's like when you go to sleep, your body starts to reintegrate. Same thing with companies. When they go into hibernation, you can start saying, okay, how do I get organized? How do I get ready for the next wave that's going to come? The third option really is the concept of, let's call it optimization, but I mean, in a real vernacular, it's downsizing, because you don't need as much stuff in this channel, for instance, anymore. So you have to optimize and downsize and still serve the need, but the need is reduced. So let's reduce that capacity and shift that to something else, which could be in the acceleration mode. So as you heard from Tom's story, certain parts of his operations are running more than 100%, and there's going to be a need for, how do I satisfy the needs of, these meals that people need to eat at home? So there's different opportunities that are going to present themselves. And the fifth option really is a thing called pivot, to move into something that you've never done before, because there's a new opportunity and you have certain capabilities that can be leveraged, either by yourself or with a partnership. So those are the 5 strategic choices, so that your mission most likely will have to be re-looked at in these 5 categories. But doing that is not enough. Just defining in your mission doesn't do any good if you have an old structure. So if your organization structures are aligned around the old set of principles, so you have to go and restructure the organization to support these particular entities. I have one client that's in the third-party logistics business. They have tremendous relationships, and right now this personal protection equipment is in high demand, and they have resources in China. They were basically in the shipping business, shipping containers from one end of the world to the other. And for the longest of time, he said, you guys better get into the air freight business. And said, yeah, we'll do that. But with this crisis, the ships are not moving. And suddenly they've been able to move into the air freight business. It was always in their mission that they couldn't deploy it because they were too happy with, and they were doing very well. So sometimes your success stops you from moving into the things you need to move into. And then they have relationships. So suddenly they've opened up a trading business which buys stuff and are distributing personal protective equipment to the healthcare industry. So those are examples that are happening very rapidly. And they couldn't do it themselves. They did do some partnerships because, you have to, there's a financing element to it. There's a risk mitigation element because, there's different parties, but they have the knowledge of who to connect, and then they were able to play that game. So those are the things, but not only is the structure got to change, you also have to change the information flow. Your metrics, your KPIs are no longer valid because you've got some old thinking of how you look at the world, but those numbers can give you the wrong, sort of a false reading, and doesn't serve you in this new world order. Simple example being, a classic business school term is your pricing policy should be, you should always price above and cover at least your variable cost. And anything that gives a positive contribution to your fixed is a good thing. well, in this day and age, what the market can bear doesn't cover your variable costs, and now what do you do? So changing your thinking to understand maybe you have to invest even because if you want to keep your system running, and seeing how this negative oil pricing is constructed, you can see some examples of forget about below variable cost. You're actually paying people, you're minus into a negative zone. So all of those assumptions are no longer valid, but you've got to make those decisions. But to make those decisions, you have to have the right information, which gets back to a key thing is cash is essentially the name of the game right now. So if you don't shift your information flows to really understand the cash dynamic, it's going to be leading you astray. And then finally, the reward systems also have to be aligned, because here what the reward systems are also upside down. Here you're going to actually pay people less to work harder. And so that's the reality. So how do you align the reward systems to activate more intrinsic rewards rather than extrinsic rewards? Because money is scarce, and everybody is talking about chopping heads or taking haircuts to reduce the cost. And so those are the key things. So you have to align systems. Your mission has to change, your structure changes, your information views, your dashboards have to change, and your reward systems change. But doing it in a way that actually increases integration. So the integration is key, and integrating not only yourself, but your company, your suppliers, your customers, and your community to come out stronger. So that's the name of the game. And as people navigate this, they are finding tremendous opportunities, but some are suffering too. And even if you only have a business that's going into hibernation, that's a good thing too, because if you can just say, hey, I'm here to hibernate and I'm going to improve my internals, that's also a valid option. Greg, I can keep talking, but I'm going to pass it back to you.
What you were talking about there, the slowing down, when you study leadership issues, you always hear that the leader has to be a calming influence, right? That the leader, by leading, you're actually controlling the anxiety in the organization. And I think now at this time, that's more important than ever, that the leader can show that they're a calming force, because if the leader gets too stressed out and nervous, people will follow that. Right,
you're right, and you can't fake it either. It's got to be real, because you can come and put on the show, but if you look at dogs can sense your level of stress or anxiety, and all of us can feel it too. It's not something you can put on a good show up on the outside, but people can see right through that mask, especially now. So you've got to be authentic in that feeling of confidence, feeling of certainty and anxiety. And part of it is also being vulnerable and saying, hey, we don't have the answers. But the trick now is, how do you de-risk it? How do you share this burden? Because leadership cannot be monopolized either. This is the perfect place to allow other people to step up to the plate and demonstrate their leadership. I mean, because there's lots of leaders that are being born every day, and you see in wartime, the colonel gets taken out, and then suddenly the captain becomes the leader, and they're able to perform very well. So I think we shouldn't dismiss the fact that it doesn't have to be monopolized. It can actually be distributed if you have the right kind of culture and the right perspective on this matter.
So, Toms, one thing I heard you say that I found interesting was that you've put a lot of new safety measures at Orkla in your production, and I'm wondering, do you see those new measures as just being the new normal, even once the crisis is over?
Yeah, I think if not all of them, I think quite many of them will become a new normal, definitely. And it doesn't just apply only for food industry or manufacturing, producing food, where when it comes to the food safety, it's like on the highest level one could imagine, and so it is in Orkla as well. Obviously, I mean, one thing is that many of those things will sort of be a new normal. But I think in general, across all industries and in general in our lives going forward, we'll see quite interesting new safety measures implemented in our daily lives. I mean, you look back in, major things happening back in history, which very much goes sort of on the negative side, whether it's a wars or some terrorist attacks and stuff like that. All that brings additional measures, safety measures, or either it's one way or another, but these are safety measures which sort of gives an implication on the way how we live. But definitely when it comes to what we have done as well, in terms, even today, the question is, I think another discussion that we have had is once we start to open up, for example, for the office people as well, and once they start to come back into offices, I mean, how do we do that? You might lift all the restrictions, but there will be still the coronavirus will be there for quite some time, and there will be people who probably will not feel comfortable with that. And how do you measure? How do you again treat those situations? How do you treat people? How do you treat your employees? I think this will be way higher on everyone's agenda, not only ours.
Okay, for sure. Even once everything is lifted by government, there will still be a lot of uncertainty and fear among the population. Definitely. About, is this really gone? Right. So, Olans, I want to follow up on a couple of things that Sunil said. One, he said you need to slow down in order to speed up, right? And the other thing he talked about was engaging your heart more in the practice of running a business. So I'd like to just hear your comment on those two issues.
Sure. I really liked a lot of the comments that Sunil was making, particularly with respect to change. One way of looking at this whole thing is that COVID-19 is an agent of change. It's a massive agent of change for us. It's going to drive so much change that I think we don't even understand the full extent of it as yet. But that's not a bad thing. It's almost like somebody has come and pressed the major reset button on everything we do. And that's a reset button for us as humanity, for countries, for economies, for businesses. And it's exactly what I had been thinking about earlier, which is that it does provide us with the opportunity to really pause, step back, slow down, rethink, reevaluate, reassess, and figure out for ourselves as individuals, for our companies, for our businesses, what's really important, what's working and what's not working, and what are our main priorities going to be in terms of moving forward in the way we live, work, interact, etc. So there's a lot of good, I think, that can come out of this. Another aspect of that is also that some businesses in many countries around the world have been small, struggling, marginal businesses. And maybe for some of them, it's a way to cause them, to push them to reinvent themselves. And if they do that successfully, good. In other cases, maybe it's actually almost like a self-cleaning mechanism within the economic system for some entrepreneurs to be forced to close down that business and do something different. And as harsh as that may sound, maybe that's the best thing in some cases. I see the situation here in Thailand, for example. Thailand is an amazing country in terms of the number of, let's call them small businesses or micro SMEs, small medium enterprises, micro businesses. And that can be the guy, selling noodles on the street. And there are millions of them, and they're very entrepreneurial and they work hard. But actually, for many of them, life is a serious, serious struggle. They are barely making ends meet. So maybe this is something that, in the case of some of them, will force them to rethink and do some things differently. And in some cases, they might step away from it and do something completely different altogether. So it's kind of like a major reset. To Sunil's point about, I think you said, Sunil, thinking with the heart or feeling with the heart. I'm a big fan of that kind of approach to everything in life, which is you know, the way you think, the way you speak, everything, all of that has a very big impact on what you actually achieve in life or what you bring into your existence. So I think a big part of it is actually not just doing things based on numbers and business plans and strategies and so forth, but really, to an extent, using one's intuition, call it gut feel, whatever you like to call it. And that reminds me of another analogy, which is that in the old times, it used to be accepted that in order to do something in business or, you know, the sequence was ready, aim, fire. Well, these days, I think it's more a case of ready, fire, and then aim. If we can do that and do it decisively and do it intuitively, that can often get us good results. And then we aim and we readjust and modify our approach as we go. But at least we've done something. We're not sitting there waiting for something else to happen beyond our control.
All right, thank you. Some really important words. I mean, this, you know, our economy throughout the world, global economy, has really been on steroids for the last few decades. I mean, it's just been full speed ahead, as fast as you can go, as much money as you can make. And basically overnight, we've been brought to a halt. And you know, it's really forcing us, except for Tom's, right? Maybe Tom's is more busy now. Some of those essential businesses are still working really hard. But for many of us, business has almost completely stopped. And it really forces us to spend more time with ourselves, more time looking at our businesses. And there really is an opportunity there to reevaluate and figure out what is important and to move forward with that. And we even hear that from Tom's, who has said that they have now brought in the scenario planning. And so they're aiming, they're looking for different targets and aiming for those before they're going to take off. But still, business has to move forward, right? We got to keep working and working hard. I heard a lot of optimism today, so thank all of you for that. I really enjoyed it, and I think our audience got something of value here, so thank you for your time, and good luck to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you from Riga Business School, the Adizes Institute. I know that maybe, Sunil, you can help me. In 1 hour, there is a talk by Dr. Adizes online, in which he's going to talk more about this idea of spirituality and profits and leading from the heart. So where can people find that?
So basically it's exactly an hour from now. There's a live conversation between a spiritual master, which is actually Dr. Adizes' guide, spiritual guide, and Dr. Adizes, and it's called Tune Into Your Heart. And you can look it up on Facebook Live. Sorry, it's on Facebook Live and YouTube Live. So if you go to YouTube Live, Tune Into Your Heart, episode 4, they've been doing this every Friday at 8:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time. So it's an hour from now, and it's a pretty unplugged conversation. And how do you? Because there's typically people think of spirituality as a paradox, but if you want to get to your heart, spirituality has the keys to that. So how do you mix them and bring it together and remove this? So the topic is, can spirituality drive success and profits? That's the topic for today.
Very good. Okay, so tune into that. And thank you all again, and goodbye. Good luck.